The massive alien ship appeared in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning, casting shadows over entire cities as it hung motionless in space. For 3 days, governments around the world scrambled to figure out what it meant. Then the message came, through every radio, television, and communication device on the planet at exactly the same time. "Greetings, primitive species. We wish to meet with your leaders." Admiral Park Min-ho had been expecting this moment for years. As head of Earth's newly formed Space Defense Command, he'd spent sleepless nights wondering when humanity's crude experiments with faster-than-light travel would attract attention. Their first successful warp test had lasted barely 3 seconds and moved a small probe only a few thousand kilometers. But apparently, that tiny spark of energy had been like lighting a campfire in the middle of a dark forest. The meeting took place on Lunar Station, humanity's proudest achievement in space. The research facility orbited the moon, its gleaming corridors and laboratories representing the best of human engineering. Park Min-ho chose it deliberately. If these aliens thought humans were completely primitive, they could at least see that. Earth's children had managed to spread beyond their home world. Ambassador Kraltex was nothing like the aliens in old Earth movies. Instead of the classic grey creatures with big black eyes, this being stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished bronze. His 4 eyes moved independently, constantly scanning the room while his translator device converted his clicking sounds into perfect English. "Your species shows promise," Kraltex said, settling into a specially constructed chair that creaked under his weight. "We have been watching your recent ventures into space, crude but ambitious. The Galactic Trade Consortium appreciates such enthusiasm." Park Min-ho had prepared for this conversation for months. Earth's best linguists, psychologists, and negotiators had briefed him on every possible scenario. But sitting across from this towering alien, he found himself relying on simple instinct. "We're honored by your visit," Park Min-ho replied carefully. "Earth is always interested in peaceful contact with other civilizations." The alien's translator clicked rapidly as Kraltex spoke. "Peaceful, yes, but also realistic. Space is dangerous, Admiral Park Min-ho. Your species has barely learned to leave your atmosphere. There are threats you cannot imagine lurking between the stars. Pirates, raiders, hostile empires that would view your world as nothing more than resources to be harvested." Park Min-ho felt his jaw tighten slightly. The alien's tone carried the same condescending note he'd heard from certain politicians who thought military officers were simple-minded. "That's why the consortium offers protection," Kraltex continued. "We have defended dozens of emerging species as they take their first steps into the galaxy. For a small contribution of resources and cooperation, we ensure your safety and guide your development. Think of us as older brothers, helping younger siblings navigate a complex universe." The terms of the partnership were exactly what Park Min-ho had feared. Earth would provide raw materials, allow consortium bases on human worlds, and accept advisors for all major decisions. In return, the aliens would protect humanity from unnamed threats and gradually introduce them to galactic civilization. "It's a generous offer," Park Min-ho said slowly, "though there's something you should probably know about us before we proceed." Kraltex's 4 eyes focused on the human admiral with renewed interest. "Our military ships don't take prisoners." The statement hung in the air between them. Kraltex's translator was silent for a long moment, then clicked softly as the alien processed the words. "Ah," Kraltex said, and Park Min-ho could swear he heard amusement in the artificial voice. "How direct." "Yes, we understand that primitive. Species often have harsh customs during their early development. No doubt this will change as you mature under proper guidance." Park Min-ho kept his expression neutral, but inside he felt a cold certainty settling into place. This alien, this entire consortium, had just made the same mistake that had gotten countless enemies killed throughout human history. They had heard humanity's warning and dismissed it as empty posturing. The partnership agreement had been signed, with great ceremony, broadcast across Earth as humanity's first step into a larger universe. But in the secret military facilities scattered across the globe, the real work had already begun, months before the aliens arrived. Captain Lee Subin watched through the massive viewport as the unyielding took shape in the orbital shipyard above Earth. The dreadnought was humanity's crown jewel, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Every rivet, every armor plate, every weapon system had been designed with one purpose in mind. The ship wasn't built to explore or to carry cargo or to establish colonies. It was built to kill. "Ma'am, the hegemony observers are requesting another tour of the lower decks," reported Lieutenant Kim Do-hyun from the communications station. Lee Soo-bin almost smiled. The aliens had been politely requesting access to various parts of human ships for weeks now, always under the guise of helping with design improvements. Their confusion was becoming more obvious with each visit. "Grant them access to sections C through F," she replied. "Standard escort protocols." The alien observers had been particularly puzzled by what they didn't find aboard human vessels. Every ship in their vast experience contained the same basic facilities: crew quarters, engineering sections, weapons systems, and most importantly, detention areas, prisoner holding cells, interrogation rooms, medical facilities for treating captured enemies, transport systems for moving large numbers of captives. Human ships had none of these things. Where other species would install holding cells, humans had mounted additional ammunition storage. Where others built interrogation facilities, humans installed more weapons. Every cubic meter of space that could have been used for managing prisoners was instead dedicated to making the ship more lethal. Admiral Morgeth of the Hegemony Fleet studied the intelligence reports in his private quarters aboard the massive command ship Dominant Will. The holographic displays showed detailed scans of human vessels, their internal layouts mapped out by hidden sensors carried by the helpful observers. "It makes no sense," muttered Commander Veltak, his chief intelligence officer. "How do they expect to gather information from defeated enemies? How do they process captured crews for labor assignments? How do they conduct proper interrogations?" Morgeth leaned back in his command chair, his 6 arms folded in a gesture that indicated deep thought among his species. "They're inexperienced," he said finally. "This is what happens when a species develops military technology without proper guidance. They haven't learned the fundamental principles of warfare yet." The other officers around the briefing table clicked their agreement. It was obvious to anyone with proper military training. War wasn't just about destroying enemy ships. That was wasteful and primitive. Civilized species understood that defeated enemies were valuable resources. Captured crews could provide intelligence about enemy tactics, reveal the locations of hidden bases, and eventually be processed into useful labor forces. "They'll learn," Morgeth continued. "Once we begin their proper education, they'll understand how inefficient their current approach is. We'll teach them to build proper detention facilities, to establish interrogation protocols, to manage captured populations effectively." The briefing continued for another hour, with various officers presenting plans for humanity's eventual correction. None of them considered the possibility that humans had designed their ships exactly as intended. None of them wondered whether the absence of prisoner facilities might be deliberate rather than ignorant. In the shipyards around Earth, work continued on the growing human fleet. Each vessel followed the same basic design philosophy that had puzzled the alien observers: maximum firepower, maximum armor, maximum speed. Zero accommodation for prisoners because prisoners were never part of the equation. Captain Lee Soo-bin stood on her bridge and watched another human dreadnought take shape in the distant construction bay. The aliens thought humans were building ships wrong. Soon enough, they would learn that humans had built them exactly right for the kind of war they intended to fight. A war where the only acceptable outcome was the complete elimination of the enemy. A war where surrender was not an option, because no one would be left alive to surrender. New Sol Colony had been humanity's pride for 15 years. Built on a world with purple skies and 2 small moons, it housed nearly 50,000 farmers, engineers and their families. The colonists had turned barren plains into thriving agricultural zones that fed 3 other human settlements. Children played in parks while their parents worked in fields that stretched to the horizon. The attack came without warning on a quiet Thursday morning. Captain Kim Jae-won was reviewing supply reports aboard the patrol ship Defiant when the emergency beacon screamed across every communication channel. His coffee mug shattered on the deck as the ship lurched into emergency acceleration. All stations battle alert, Kim announced over the intercom, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. This is not a drill. The Defiant was small by military standards, designed for patrol duties and escort missions rather than frontline combat. Against pirates or raiders, she could hold her own. Against 3 full-size destroyers, the math was simple and brutal. Lieutenant Park So-young pulled up the tactical display from her position at the weapons console. 3 massive ships hung in orbit around New Seoul, their energy signatures, painting them as military vessels despite their attempts to mask their identities. Each destroyer was 4 times the size of the Defiant and carried enough firepower to level a city. "Sir, we're looking at roughly 600 enemy crew members total," reported Ensign Choi Min-jun from the intelligence station. "They're broadcasting demands for the colony to surrender all food stores and mining equipment." Kim studied the display, watching as the enemy ships moved into bombardment positions above the main settlement. Bright flashes in the upper atmosphere showed that the destroyers had already begun attacking the colony's orbital defense platforms. "Time to intercept?" he asked his navigator. 18 minutes at maximum burn, sir. 18 minutes. In 18 minutes, those ships could reduce New Seoul colony to smoking ruins. Kim had trained for scenarios like this, but training never prepared you for the moment when you realized you were about to order 43 people to their deaths. He opened a channel to the colony's emergency command center. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to Governor Yoon Se-jin, a woman Kim had met several times during routine visits. Now her face was pale with fear as explosions lit the sky behind her. "Captain Kim, thank God," she said. "They're demanding we surrender everything. Food, equipment, even some of our people. They say if we refuse, they'll start bombing civilian areas." "Governor, get everyone into the underground shelters immediately," Kim replied. "We're en route." "Captain, there are 3 of them. Your ship will handle the situation," Kim interrupted. "That's what we're here for." As the Defiant raced toward New Seoul, Kim opened another channel. This one broadcast on all frequencies, so that both the colony and the attacking ships could hear him clearly. "This is Captain Kim Jae-won of the Human Defense Force ship Defiant. Unknown vessels currently attacking New Seoul colony. You have committed an act of war against humanity and its citizens. You are ordered to cease hostilities immediately and withdraw from this system." The response came quickly, transmitted from the lead destroyer. The voice carried the same condescending tone that Kim had heard in recordings of alien diplomatic meetings. "Little human ship, you are outnumbered and outgunned. We suggest you withdraw before you share the fate of this pathetic colony. We are merely collecting resources owed to us under galactic law." Kim's weapons officer looked up from her console with raised eyebrows. The young lieutenant had heard the stories about human military doctrine, but this would be her first real test. "Sir, should I prepare surrender protocols for when they disable us?" Kim's response was calm and matter-of-fact, spoken loud enough for the entire bridge crew to hear. "Lieutenant Park, we do not accept surrenders, and we do not offer them. Arm all weapons and prepare for combat." Aboard the lead destroyer, Commander Thexaval listened to the human transmission with growing amusement. The audacity of a single small patrol ship threatening 3 warships was almost charming in its stupidity. "The humans still think they're warriors," he clicked to his tactical officer. "Let's show them what real military power looks like." The Defiant closed the distance to the enemy destroyers like a hunting shark sensing blood in the water. Captain Kim Jae-won stood behind his tactical officer's station, watching the targeting display as Lieutenant Yoon Se-ra painted each enemy ship. With deadly precision. "Range in 30 seconds, sir," she reported, her fingers dancing across the weapons console. "All torpedo tubes loaded and ready. Point defense systems online." The 3 destroyers had spread into a loose formation, confident that their superior size and firepower would make short work of the single human patrol ship. What they hadn't counted on was the Defiant's speed and the surgical precision of her crew. "Target the lead ship's engine section," Kim ordered. "Fire when ready." The first salvo of torpedoes streaked across space in perfect formation. The Hegemony, commander aboard the lead destroyer, had barely begun to react when the weapons struck home. The massive explosions tore through the ship's rear hull, sending chunks of metal spinning into the void. Atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches as The destroyer's engines went dark. "Direct hit, sir," Yoon Se-ra reported. "Enemy vessel is dead in space, no engine power, minimal life support." That's when the screaming started. "Surrender! Surrender!" The alien commander's voice crackled across every communication frequency, raw with panic. "We yield! We request quarter under galactic law, please. We have wounded aboard." Kim reached over and cut the transmission with a single switch. The bridge of the Defiant fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the steady beeping of the targeting computers. "Fire again," he said simply. The second torpedo salvo hit the crippled destroyer amidships. The massive vessel came apart like a fragile toy, its hull splitting open, to release a brief cloud of atmosphere and debris before the vacuum of space claimed everything. In seconds, over 200 alien crew members were dead. "First target eliminated," Yoon Se-ra announced, already shifting her attention to the remaining threats. "Second enemy vessel is attempting to flee." The second destroyer had broken formation the moment its companion died, turning away from New Sol Colony, hand burning hard for the edge of the system. Its captain had apparently decided that whatever they were being paid for this mission wasn't worth facing the small human ship that had just committed what should have been impossible. But the Defiant was faster. Kim's ship curved through space, in a graceful arc, her engines pushing her to speeds that made the alien destroyer look like it was standing still. The fleeing ship tried every evasive maneuver in the book, rolling and diving through 3 dimensions as its captain desperately sought to escape. "They're good pilots," admitted Ensign Choi Min-jun from the navigation station. "But they're predictable. I can plot their next 3 moves." "Do it," Kim replied. "Lieutenant Yoon, prepare for a deflection shot." The torpedo that killed the second destroyer was a thing of beauty in its mathematical precision. Yoon Se-ra had calculated exactly where the fleeing ship would be in 12 seconds, accounting for its evasive maneuvers and the torpedo's flight. "Time!" The weapon struck the destroyer's forward section, penetrating deep into the ship before detonating. The explosion lit up space like a small sun before fading to leave nothing but expanding wreckage. The third destroyer had stopped moving. Entirely. Its captain opened a communication channel, his voice shaking with terror. "Human vessel, please. We were only following orders. We have families, children. We surrender completely. We will leave this system and never return. Please show mercy." Kim looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, 43 men and women, who had just witnessed their captain destroy 2 ships carrying hundreds of beings. Not one of them looked troubled by what they had done. Not one of them suggested accepting the surrender. "Nuclear torpedo, maximum yield," Kim ordered. The third destroyer vanished in a ball of nuclear fire that briefly outshone New Sol's sun. Hidden among the asteroids at the edge of the system, a hegemony surveillance ship recorded everything. Its crew watched in stunned silence as the human patrol ship completed a careful sweep of the battle area. They searched for escape pods, for survivors, for anyone who might have lived through the destruction of 3 warships. They found nothing because they weren't looking to rescue anyone. They were making sure no one had survived. The Defiant turned toward New Sol Colony and opened a channel to the planetary government. "Governor Yoon, this is Captain Kim. The immediate threat has been eliminated. Colony security is restored." The message went out across the galaxy at exactly 14:30 Earth Standard Time, transmitted on every frequency the hegemony used for official communications. Admiral Park Min-ho sat in his command center on Lunar Station, surrounded by screens showing star charts, fleet positions, and diplomatic channels. His voice was calm and professional as he spoke into the recording device, the same tone he might use to discuss supply shipments or training schedules. "This is Admiral Park Min-ho of the Human Defense Force. At 11:47 this morning, 3 unidentified vessels attacked the civilian colony of New Sol, targeting agricultural facilities and threatening non-combatant populations. The attack on New Sol Colony has been repelled. All attacking vessels and crews have been eliminated per standard human military doctrine. This serves as your only warning." The message was brief, factual, and delivered without emotion. Park Min-ho had spent hours with Earth's diplomatic corps, crafting the exact wording. Every phrase had been chosen carefully to convey humanity's position without unnecessary threats or inflammatory language. It was, by any reasonable standard, a perfectly professional military communication. It was also the most terrifying message the hegemony had ever received. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council began within hours of receiving the transmission. Council leader Thexmore stood at the center of the vast circular chamber, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching panic. Around him, representatives from dozens of species spoke in hushed, worried tones. "Play it again," Thexmore ordered. The human admiral's voice filled the chamber once more, each word falling like a stone into still water. When it finished, the silence stretched on for long moments. "All attacking vessels and crews have been eliminated," repeated Councillor Velnara of the Zephyrian delegation. "Not captured, not defeated, eliminated." "It's impossible," muttered another councillor. 3 destroyers against a single patrol ship. The humans must be lying about their losses. But the surveillance data from the hidden observation post told a different story. The recordings showed everything in brutal detail. The systematic destruction of 3 military vessels, the complete absence of any rescue operations, the methodical sweep of the battle area to ensure no survivors remained. Thexmore activated the chamber's main display, bringing up the original first contact recordings from 3 months earlier. The human admiral's face appeared on the massive screen, weathered and serious as he sat across from Ambassador Kraltex. "Though you should know, our military ships don't take prisoners." The words that had seemed like primitive bluster now carried a weight that made several councillors shift uncomfortably in their seats. They replayed the moment again, studying Park Min-ho's expression, his tone, his body language. "He wasn't posturing," whispered Councillor Mortek. "He was informing us of policy." The realization spread through the chamber like a virus. Every species in the galaxy understood warfare as a continuation of politics by other means. You fought to achieve objectives, territory, resources, political concessions. When those objectives were met, or when the cost became too high, you negotiated. Prisoners were valuable. Intelligence was crucial. Even defeated enemies could become useful, allies in future conflicts. Humans apparently didn't see it that way. "They don't wage war," Thexmore said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "They wage extermination." The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. If humans didn't take prisoners, if they didn't negotiate with defeated enemies, if their response to any hostile action was complete annihilation, then every assumption about dealing with them was wrong. "The patrol ship that destroyed our destroyers," said Councillor Velnara, reading from her datapad. "It's called the Defiant. Do you know what that name means in human language?" Several councillors shook their heads. "It means refusing to submit or yield, even when facing overwhelming force." She looked up at her colleagues with fear in her eyes. They named their ship after the concept of never surrendering. Thexmore felt his 4 hearts beating rapidly as the full scope of their mistake became clear. The hegemony had treated first contact with humanity like every other primitive species they'd encountered. Offer protection, establish dominance, gradually absorb them into the greater galactic community as junior partners. But humans weren't interested in being junior partners. They weren't interested in negotiating their position or finding their place in the existing order. They had built ships designed specifically for killing, developed military doctrine based on total elimination of threats, and when challenged, they had proven exactly how serious they were about both. The message had been perfectly clear. Attack human civilians, and every being responsible would die. Not be captured, not be interrogated, not be ransomed back to their governments. They would simply cease to exist. "What do we do?" asked a councillor from the back of the chamber. Thexmore stared at the frozen image of Admiral Park Min-ho on the display screen. The human's expression was patient but unyielding, like someone explaining a simple fact to a slow student. "We make sure," Thexmore said quietly, "that we never give them a reason to send another message." The warning alarms began screaming across every human facility in the Sol system at exactly 0623 Earth Standard Time. Admiral Morgeth's invasion fleet materialized from hyperspace like an unstoppable tide of metal and death, their massive hulls blotting out stars as they formed battle lines between Mars and Jupiter. 200 ships, the largest military force ever assembled by the hegemony, carrying enough firepower to crack planets and reduce entire civilizations to ash. Dreadnoughts, the size of cities, floated alongside sleek destroyers and massive carrier vessels bristling with fighter craft. It was a show of force designed to break humanity's will before the first shot was fired. The human response was swift and absolute. 37 ships rose to meet them. Captain Choi Min-seok stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser, relentless, watching the tactical display as the enemy fleet spread across his screens like a virus infection. The numbers were impossible. His entire fleet was outnumbered nearly 6-1, facing vessels that individually outgunned anything humanity had ever built. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship," reported Lieutenant Han So-young from the communications station. "Put it through." Admiral Morgeth's image filled the main screen, his alien features arranged in what might have been a patronizing smile. "Admiral Park Min-ho, I presume. Your little demonstration at New Seoul was educational. But now you face the true might of the hegemony. Surrender your fleet and submit to proper authority, and your deaths will be swift." The transmission cut to show dozens of hegemony ships, their weapons charging as fighter squadrons launched from carrier bays. It was meant to intimidate, to show humanity exactly how hopeless their situation had become. Captain Choi opened a fleet-wide channel, his voice carrying to every human ship in the formation. "All vessels, this is relentless. Enemy fleet has entered Sol system with hostile intent. You know your orders. You know our doctrine. Engage and destroy." The human fleet moved forward like a pack of wolves, their smaller ships dancing between the massive enemy dreadnoughts with deadly grace. The Relentless led the charge, her nuclear torpedoes tearing through the first line of hegemony ships before their crews could fully react to the humans' aggressive tactics. But the enemy had overwhelming numbers, and their return fire was devastating. The human destroyer Vigilant vanished in a ball of plasma as 3 enemy ships concentrated their fire on her. The cruiser, Determined, lost her forward sections to a direct hit from a hegemony dreadnought's main guns. For a moment, it looked like the invasion fleet might actually break through humanity's desperate defense. Then something unprecedented happened in the history of galactic warfare. The hegemony ships began to retreat. Admiral Morgeth's carefully planned assault was falling, apart as human vessels proved far more dangerous than intelligence reports had suggested. His ships were built for conquest, designed to overwhelm and subdue. The human vessels were built purely for killing, and they were frighteningly good at their job. "All ships, withdraw to secondary positions," Morgeth ordered over the fleet. "Communication network. Regroup at Grid 77 and prepare for coordinated assault." That's when Captain Choi's voice cut across every frequency, broadcast on channels that both fleets could hear clearly. "Hegemony fleet, retreat is not withdrawal. From combat. You initiated hostilities in human space. Engagement continues until your elimination." The word sent a chill through the alien crews that had nothing to do with the cold of space. In every previous conflict, retreat meant temporary withdrawal, regrouping, possibly negotiating a ceasefire. It was a recognized part of civilized warfare. Humans apparently didn't recognize any such conventions. The human ships pursued the retreating hegemony fleet with mechanical persistence, their damaged vessels ignoring their own wounds to continue the hunt. When enemy ships tried to break away from the main engagement, human destroyers followed them relentlessly, harrying them like wild dogs until they could move in for the kill. Lieutenant Han So-young looked up from her tactical display with barely controlled amazement. "Sir, enemy vessel Dominant Pride is requesting safe passage to the system edge. They're offering to withdraw completely." "Denied," Choi replied without hesitation. "Continue firing." The Dominant Pride died 3 minutes later, her hull split open by nuclear fire as she desperately tried to reach the hyperspace jump point. Admiral Morgeth watched from his flagship as the greatest fleet in hegemony history was systematically torn apart by an enemy that refused to accept any outcome except total annihilation. Ships that tried to surrender were destroyed. Vessels attempting to rescue survivors from damaged allies were hunted down and eliminated. Even escape pods were being targeted and destroyed. "They're not fighting a battle," whispered his tactical officer staring at the display in horror. "They're conducting an extermination." The human fleet moved through space like death itself, following the retreating aliens with cold precision. No enemy vessel would leave the Sol system alive. No survivor would carry word of defeat back to the Hegemony Council. This wasn't war as the galaxy understood it. This was something far more terrifying. The Battle of Jupiter became a legend that would be whispered about in alien military academies for generations, though none who witnessed it survived to tell the tale firsthand. What started as Admiral Morgeth's overwhelming show of force devolved into 6 hours of systematic slaughter, as human ships proved that numbers meant nothing when your enemy refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Captain Choi Min-seoks, relentless, led the human formation through the asteroid belt near Jupiter's fourth moon, using the floating rocks as cover while they hunted the scattered remnants of the Hegemony fleet. His ship bore scars from a dozen direct hits, her hull blackened and twisted in places where enemy fire had found its mark, but she was still fighting, still pursuing, still killing. "Enemy dreadnought at bearing 27 Mark 5, reported Lieutenant Yoon Jae-min from the tactical station. "She's trying to use Jupiter's gravity well to slingshot toward the jump point." "Intercept course," Choi ordered. "Maximum burn." The eye. Relentless dove toward Jupiter's massive bulk, her engines pushed beyond safe limits as she raced to cut off the fleeing enemy ship. The Hegemony dreadnought was 3 times her size, carrying enough firepower to level a moon, but size meant nothing when your enemy was willing to do things that no sane military commander would consider. "Range in 30 seconds, called out Ensign Park So-jin from navigation. "But sir, if we maintain this trajectory, we'll pass within 50 meters of their hull." "Perfect," Choi replied, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. What happened next would have been called impossible by every military strategist in the galaxy. The Relentless slammed into the Hegemony dreadnought at a combined speed of over 30,000 kilometers per hour, her reinforced bow punching through the larger ship's armor like a spear through paper. The impact should have destroyed both vessels instantly. Instead, Choi had timed it perfectly. At the moment of collision, his crew detonated the Relentless' entire nuclear arsenal in a single, coordinated explosion. The dreadnought came apart from the inside out, her massive hull splitting like an overripe fruit as the blast tore through her vital systems. The Relentless died in the explosion, taking her entire crew with her. But she had eliminated an enemy ship carrying over 800 alien personnel, and her sacrifice opened a gap in the enemy formation that other human vessels immediately exploited. Similar scenes played out across the battle space as human commanders employed tactics that defied every principle of self-preservation. The destroyer Tenacious rammed a Hegemony carrier, her reactor overloading on impact to create a miniature sun that consumed both ships. The cruiser Indomitable flew directly into the middle of an enemy squadron, detonating every weapon in her arsenal simultaneously to take out 4 ships in a chain reaction of destruction. Admiral Morgeth watched his fleet die from the bridge of his flagship Supreme Authority, the largest and most powerful vessel in the Hegemony Navy. Around him, his command staff stared at their displays in stunned disbelief as human ships continued their relentless assault, despite taking casualties that should have broken any rational force. "Sir, we've lost 60% of the fleet," reported his tactical officer, his voice hollow with shock. "The humans are still attacking. They're not even trying to preserve their own ships." Morgeth felt something cold settle in his chest as he realized the truth. These weren't warriors fighting for victory. They were fanatics fighting for extinction, either theirs or their enemies, and they clearly didn't care which it was. "Open a channel to all human vessels," he ordered. "Emergency surrender protocol." The transmission went out on every frequency, accompanied by the universal signals for ceasefire and capitulation that had been recognized across the galaxy for millennia. Morgeth's voice carried the desperation of a being who finally understood exactly what kind of enemy he was facing. "Human forces, this is Admiral Morgeth of the Hegemony Fleet. We surrender unconditionally. We will withdraw from your system immediately and make no further aggressive moves. Please, we have wounded aboard. We request safe passage under galactic conventions." The response came from Lieutenant Commander Han So-young aboard the destroyer Relentless, her ship moving to intercept the flagship, despite being outnumbered and outgunned by the vessels still protecting it. Admiral Morgeth, this is Lieutenant Commander Han So-young. Your surrender is not accepted. You entered human space with hostile intent. The engagement continues until your elimination. The Supreme Authority died 12 minutes later, her massive hull torn apart by a coordinated nuclear strike from the remaining human vessels. Admiral Morgeth's final transmission was cut off mid-sentence as the ship's command section vaporized in white-hot plasma. Lieutenant Commander, Han So-young's voice crackled across the tactical network as the last hegemony ship, a damaged transport trying to limp toward the system edge, exploded under concentrated fire from 3 human destroyers. All vessels, this is Vengeful. Final sweep complete. All enemy contacts eliminated. No survivors detected. Sol system secure. The battlefield fell silent except for the hiss of radiation and the slow tumble of debris. 200 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of metal and vapor. Not a single alien had survived to carry word back to the Hegemony Council. The human fleet had been reduced to 11 battered ships, most of them barely functional. But they had accomplished their mission with the cold efficiency that was becoming humanity's signature in the cosmos. 0 prisoners taken, 0 survivors, 0 mercy. The galaxy's most powerful military force had ceased to exist, annihilated by a species that fought war like a force of nature, absolute, implacable, and utterly without compromise. The quantum communication burst that carried news of the Sol massacre reached the farthest corners of the galaxy within 6 hours of the battle's end. The message was simple, factual, and absolutely terrifying. 200 hegemony warships had entered human space with overwhelming force. None had returned. On the water world of Aquatica Prime, Ambassador Yixtel of the Neural Collective sat in his crystalline office reviewing the intelligence reports with growing horror. The Neural Collective prided itself on understanding the psychological patterns of other species, but the humans had just demonstrated a mindset that defied every model his scientists had created. "Play the recording again," he instructed his aide. The holographic display showed the final moments of Admiral Morgeth's flagship, the massive dreadnought breaking apart under nuclear fire even as it transmitted surrender codes. The human response had been swift and absolute, continued attack until complete destruction. "Sir," his aide asked nervously, "should we prepare the usual post-battle diplomatic protocols, perhaps offer to mediate between the humans and what remains of the hegemony?" Yixtel's tentacles writhed in what his species used to express deep anxiety. "There will be no mediation. There is no remainder of the hegemony fleet to negotiate with. The humans eliminated everything." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in government centers and military headquarters. The Velthari Empire's War Council met in emergency session, their reptilian faces grim as they reviewed footage of human ships ramming enemy vessels in suicidal attacks that nonetheless achieved their objectives. "Recall all border fleets immediately," ordered Supreme Commander Velthon, his scaled hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "Establish a 50-light-year buffer zone around all human territory. No Velthari vessel is to approach their space under any circumstances." "Sir?" questioned his tactical advisor. "Are we surrendering territorial claims without even attempting negotiation?" Velthon's eyes fixed on the display showing the debris field that had once been the galaxy's most powerful fleet. "Negotiation requires 2 parties willing to accept outcomes other than total victory. The humans have demonstrated they are not such a party." On the industrial world of Mechanica 7, the Consortium of Free Worlds held their own crisis meeting. Trade Minister Zorbak reviewed the economic implications with growing panic, his mechanical augmentations clicking nervously as he processed the data. "We have 17 different protection contracts with human colonies," he announced to the assembled delegates. "All of them contain clauses allowing us to establish military bases and station enforcement fleets in their systems." The silence that followed was deafening. Every delegate understood the implications. Those contracts had been written under the assumption that humans were a typical emerging species that would gradually accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. Now they realized they had essentially placed military assets within striking distance of beings who viewed any hostile presence as a target for complete elimination. "Cancel the contracts," ordered Chairman Mextar, his voice heavy with resignation. "All of them, immediately, and send formal apologies for any misunderstanding about our intentions." Similar conversations took place across dozens of species and hundreds of worlds. The Crystalline Confederation quietly withdrew their mining surveys from systems near human space. The nomadic fleets altered their traditional migration routes to avoid any possibility of accidental contact. The merchant guilds issued emergency bulletins, warning their members that humans apparently made no distinction between military and commercial vessels when determining threats. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from the warrior clans of Korvac, a species that had built their entire culture around concepts of honor in battle and respect for defeated enemies. Their supreme war chief, Korvac Tan the Undefeated, issued a statement that sent shockwaves through military circles everywhere. "The humans do not fight, they exterminate. There is no honor in such warfare, but there is a terrible effectiveness. That cannot be ignored. The warrior clans will not seek conflict with humanity. They have chosen a path that leads only to death, and we will not walk beside them on it." Ambassador Yixtel finally composed his priority message to the Neural Collective's ruling council, his tentacles steady now that he had reached his conclusion. Immediate priority to all Neural Collective assets. Establish complete diplomatic and military isolation from human space. Analysis of recent conflict indicates humans do not wage war for conquest, resources, or political. The shuttle that approached Lunar Station 6 months after the Sol massacre looked nothing like the imposing warship that had announced first contact with humanity. This vessel was small, unarmed, and carried diplomatic markings that practically screamed peaceful intentions. Its arrival had been announced weeks in advance, with formal requests for safe passage submitted through every available channel. Ambassador Kraltex stepped into the same conference room where he had first met Admiral Park Min-ho, but everything about his demeanor had changed. Gone was the condescending attitude and casual arrogance. The towering alien moved carefully, respectfully, like someone visiting a shrine where terrible and sacred events had taken place. Admiral Park Min-ho looked exactly the same as he had 6 months earlier, his weathered face calm and professional as he gestured for the alien delegation to take their seats. But Kraltex could see something different in the human's eyes now, a quiet confidence that came from having his words proven absolutely true in the most dramatic way possible. "Admiral Park Min-ho," Kraltex began, his translator device converting his nervous clicks into carefully formal English. "On behalf of the Galactic Trade Consortium, I bring offers of full membership, equal status, and complete diplomatic recognition. Save humanity." The documents he placed on the table were works of art in their own way, crafted by the galaxy's finest legal minds to offer humanity everything they had initially been denied. Full voting rights in the consortium, equal trade status, recognition of human territorial claims. Most importantly, the complete cancellation of all previous protection agreements that had essentially treated Earth as a vassal state. Park Min-ho reviewed the documents with the same methodical attention he had shown to the original partnership offer. But this time there was no rush, no pressure, no subtle threats hidden behind diplomatic language. The galaxy was asking to join humanity's community, not the other way around. "These terms are acceptable," Park Min-ho said finally. "Humanity is pleased to participate in peaceful galactic trade and cooperation." The relief that washed over the alien delegation was almost tangible. Several of the representatives actually relaxed for the first time since entering human space, their various alien physiologies showing clear signs of reduced stress. But then Park Min-ho continued speaking, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "However, there is something that needs to be clearly understood by all parties involved in these new arrangements." Kraltex's 4 eyes focused intently on the human admiral, hanging on every word. "Our military doctrine has not changed," Park Min-ho stated with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Our ships still don't take prisoners. We suggest that the galaxy remember this fact as we move forward with our new relationship. The words weren't spoken as a threat. There was no menace in Park Min-ho's voice, no aggressive posturing or implied violence. He was simply stating a fact, the same way he might mention that Earth had one moon or that humans required oxygen to breathe. But every alien in the room understood the implications perfectly. They had all seen the recordings from the Sol system. They had all witnessed what happened when someone chose to test humanity's resolve. The wreckage of 200 hegemony warships served as a permanent reminder that humans said exactly what they meant, and meant exactly what they said. "Of course, Admiral," Kraltex replied quickly. "The Consortium has no intention of testing human resolve. We seek only peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit." The meeting concluded with handshakes and formal ceremonies, all broadcast across the galaxy as proof that humanity had taken its place among the stars as an equal partner in galactic civilization. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchange programs were established, and communication networks were opened. But beneath all the diplomatic pleasantries, every alien delegate carried the same message back to their home worlds. Humanity was willing to cooperate, willing to trade, willing to coexist peacefully with their galactic neighbors, as long as those neighbors never forgot that human ships didn't take prisoners. The shuttle carrying the alien delegation departed Lunar Station with its precious cargo of signed agreements and formal treaties. But more importantly, it carried the absolute certainty that humanity's place in the galaxy was now secure not through fear alone, but through the complete understanding that some species meant exactly what they said. The galaxy had gained a new partner, but it had also learned a new rule. Never test the resolve of beings who treat warfare as a binary equation with only one acceptable outcome. In the months and years that followed, human merchant ships would travel freely through galactic trade routes, human colonies would flourish without interference, and human diplomats would be received with the respect due to equals rather than the condescension shown to primitives. And in the dark reaches of space, human warships would continue their patrols with holds empty of detention facilities and crew quarters, designed for war rather than peace. Because some things never change, and humanity's approach to those who threatened their people was one of them. The galaxy had learned to live with that reality, and surprisingly it turned out to be a much more peaceful place because of it.